Ibrahim Traoré, a name now synonymous with ambition and uncertainty, stands as a stark reminder of Burkina Faso's turbulent journey. At an age when many are still finding their footing, Traoré leads a nation grappling with a tumultuous present and an uncertain future. His rise to power draws inevitable comparisons to Thomas Sankara, the iconic revolutionary leader. Sankara, known for his charisma and commitment to social justice, remains a potent symbol of hope and change. His assassination in 1987 left a void that many believe Traoré is attempting to fill. Both men rose to prominence through the military, seizing control in coups that promised a break from the past. Traoré's rule remains an enigma, leaving the world to ponder his legacy. To understand Traoré's ascent, one must first delve into the complex web of challenges that have plagued Burkina Faso in recent years. The Sahel region, once a beacon of trade and cultural exchange, has become synonymous with instability and violence. The rise of extremist groups, fueled by poverty, inequality, and porous borders, has cast a long shadow over the region. Burkina Faso, landlocked and resource-scarce, has found itself on the front lines of this battle, its fragile peace shattered by increasingly frequent and brazen attacks. The security forces, ill-equipped and demoralized, struggled to contain the growing insurgency. Public frustration with the government's perceived inaction grew, creating a breeding ground for discontent. It was against this backdrop of fear and uncertainty that Ibrahim Traoré, a relatively unknown army captain, seized his moment. The coup, swift and bloodless, sent shockwaves through the nation. Traoré, in his first public address, promised a new era for Burkina Faso, vowing to restore security, tackle corruption, and usher in an era of prosperity. His words, laced with a potent mix of anger and hope, resonated with a population desperate for change. The initial days of Traoré's rule were marked by a cautious optimism. His condemnations of corruption, a chronic ailment in Burkina Faso's political system, were met with cautious approval. His pledges to bolster the military and prioritize the fight against extremist groups provided a glimmer of hope to a nation weary of violence. However, beneath the surface of these pronouncements, a current of unease began to stir. Traoré, despite his rhetoric of inclusivity, moved swiftly to consolidate power. The suspension of the constitution, while presented as a necessary measure to restore order, raised concerns about the junta's commitment to democratic principles. The international community, wary of yet another coup in a region grappling with political instability, expressed reservations about Traoré's seizure of power. The African Union and the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, imposed sanctions, demanding a return to constitutional order and a clear timetable for fresh elections. Traoré, unfazed by the international pressure, remained defiant. He embarked on a series of public engagements, seeking to shore up support among the population. His speeches, delivered with the passion of a seasoned orator, resonated particularly with young people, many of whom saw in him a reflection of their own frustrations and aspirations. As months turned into years, the initial euphoria surrounding Traoré's rise began to dissipate. The promised crackdown on corruption yielded few tangible results, and the security situation, far from improving, deteriorated further. The extremist groups, emboldened by the political instability, intensified their attacks, targeting not only security forces, but also civilians. Amidst this escalating violence, a more troubling trend emerged: the erosion of human rights. The junta, facing mounting pressure to contain the insurgency, resorted to increasingly draconian measures. Reports of extrajudicial killings, enforced disappearances, and arbitrary arrests by security forces became commonplace. Independent media outlets and civil society organizations, once vibrant voices of dissent, found themselves silenced. Journalists were harassed, intimidated, and in some cases detained without charge. Human rights defenders, accused of collaborating with terrorists or undermining national security, were subjected to threats, arbitrary arrests, and enforced disappearances. Section 5. Bloodshed and displacement, the human cost of instability. The human toll of Burkina Faso's protracted crisis has been nothing short of catastrophic. The violence, once concentrated in the northern regions, has spread like wildfire, engulfing vast swaths of the country. Villages have been razed, communities torn apart, and families forced to flee their homes in search of safety. The United Nations estimates that over 2 million people have been internally displaced within Burkina Faso, a staggering figure that underscores the magnitude of the humanitarian crisis. These displaced individuals, many of whom have lost everything, face a precarious existence in overcrowded camps and informal settlements, often lacking access to basic necessities such as food, water, sanitation, and healthcare. The education system, already fragile, has been decimated. Thousands of schools have been forced to close due to insecurity, depriving an entire generation of children of their fundamental right to education. The long-term consequences of this educational crisis are profound, threatening to trap Burkina Faso in a vicious cycle of poverty and underdevelopment. Section 6. Echoes of discontent, crackdowns, and the stifling of dissent. As the security situation worsened and the humanitarian crisis deepened, so too did the crackdown on dissent. The junta, increasingly intolerant of criticism, tightened its grip on power, viewing any form of opposition as a threat to its authority. Peaceful protests, once a cornerstone of Burkina Faso's democracy, were met with brute force. Security forces used tear gas, rubber bullets, and live ammunition to disperse demonstrators, resulting in numerous casualties. Opposition leaders, activists, and human rights defenders were arbitrarily arrested and detained without charge, often held incommunicado for extended periods. The judiciary, once a bastion of independence, came under increasing pressure to toe the junta's line. Judges who dared to rule against the government were transferred, intimidated, or removed from their posts. The rule of law, already fragile, was further eroded, replaced by a climate of fear and impunity. Section 7. Beyond Burkina Faso's borders, the Sahel's spreading unrest. Burkina Faso's turmoil cannot be viewed in isolation. The country is but one piece in a larger, more complex puzzle of instability that has come to define the Sahel region. From Mali to Niger, Chad to northern Nigeria, a toxic mix of poverty, inequality, climate change, and weak governance has created a fertile breeding ground for extremism and violence. The porous borders that crisscross the Sahel have allowed armed groups to operate with relative impunity, exploiting local grievances, trafficking in arms and drugs, and launching cross-border raids. The region has become a magnet for jihadist groups, including affiliates of Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State, who have exploited the lack of governance and the widespread disillusionment with the state to expand their influence. The international community, alarmed by the deteriorating security situation in the Sahel, has poured billions of dollars into counter-terrorism efforts. However, these efforts, often characterized by a heavy-handed military approach, have yielded mixed results at best. In some cases, they have exacerbated existing tensions, fueling resentment towards the government and creating new recruits for extremist groups. Section 8. A generation in the balance. Burkina Faso's uncertain future. As Burkina Faso enters its 5th year under military rule, the path ahead remains shrouded in uncertainty. Traoré, despite his initial promises of swift action, has struggled to contain the spiraling violence or address the root causes of the crisis. The human cost of the conflict continues to mount, with millions displaced, communities torn apart, and an entire generation scarred by the trauma of violence. The international community, once hopeful that Traoré's leadership might usher in a new era of stability, has grown increasingly disillusioned. The junta's failure to articulate a clear roadmap for a return to constitutional rule, coupled with its dismal human rights record, has led to calls for tougher sanctions and a more robust international response. Yet, amidst the despair, glimmers of hope persist. Civil society organizations, despite facing immense challenges, continue to operate, documenting human rights abuses, providing humanitarian assistance, and advocating for peace. Journalists, despite facing intimidation and censorship, continue to report on the crisis, shining a light on the plight of those affected by the conflict. Section 9. Conclusion. Traoré's reckoning. A revolution yet to be won. Ibrahim Traoré's rule, born out of a promise to deliver Burkina Faso from violence and instability, stands at a crossroads. The young captain, once hailed as a savior, now faces a reckoning, his legacy intertwined with the nation's fate. The path ahead is fraught with challenges. The security situation remains dire, the humanitarian crisis deepens, and dissent has shrunk dramatically. The international community, eager to assist, is constrained by the junta's intransigence. Traoré's leadership will be judged on addressing the root causes of the conflict. This requires prioritizing dialogue, inclusivity, and accountability. Only then can Burkina Faso heal and move towards a just future. The revolution Traoré promised remains elusive. Whether he can bridge the gap between rhetoric and reality will determine his legacy and the nation's fate.